We are joined now with more by Professor Eytan Gilboa of Bar-Ilan University and also a senior fellow of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
So U.S.-backed rocket systems arrived in Ukraine with the U.S. announcing new military aid. How long will the United States be able to supply arms to Ukraine, in your opinion?
This is a critical question because Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, has said this week that the war may last longer, maybe years. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Britain, said the same thing. So the challenge would be for the West to outpace the Russian rearming and resupplying of its forces in the Donbas area. And this will be a top issue on the NATO agenda for a meeting that will take place later next week.
And with the two big summits, the G7 and the NATO summit, defining a new strategic concept, how significant is it and what do we need to pay attention to?
Very important. The original idea for this NATO meeting was to develop a new strategy toward China, specifically towards the exponential expansion of the Chinese military and Chinese challenges to Western and American allies in Asia. But the continuing war in Ukraine is now changing the agenda. NATO will have to decide what to do with all kinds of new threats, how to share among the countries the resupplying of more modern, more equipment, more ammunition to Ukraine, what to do with Kaliningrad. This is a Russian enclave on the Baltic Sea, and Lithuania prevented the transfer of goods, Russian goods, to this enclave. Lithuania is a member of both NATO and the European Union and is implementing sanctions. So Russia now is threatening a NATO member. The other question is deployment of forces. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the United States increased its forces in Europe from 70,000 to 100,000. NATO is planning a major modernization of its armed forces, 2% of its GNP, which means in the next 2 or 3 years, $200 billion. So the agenda is full.
Right. Wow. So with that said, I mean, do you see any scenario in the future that NATO will have to actively be involved in the conflict with Russia?
Well, NATO does not want to be involved directly. NATO has been involved indirectly through the supply of weapons. Obviously, the war in Ukraine has never been from the beginning just a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between a dictatorship, the Russian dictatorship, and the Western democracy. It is a confrontation over domination, over a challenge to the present international order. And therefore, NATO is saying, Western leaders are saying, the costs are very high. The G7 meeting, which you mentioned just a few minutes ago, it will be discussing the effects of the war in Ukraine on energy. Prices went up tremendously, food shortages, serious food shortages. So next week is going to be a critical week for all kinds of ideas and programs to influence the course of the war in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Professor Gilboa. Much appreciated.